A mutant virus cancelled Christmas. Was it just another example of overreaction by the government? A Brexit trade deal limps over the line at the very last minute, and President Trump is urged to sabotage Joe Biden's intent to rejoin the Paris Agreement on climate change. My name's Mallen Baker. This is the Mallen Baker Show. A mutant virus has emerged to terrify the nation and to cancel Christmas. And the world panicked, cutting ties with the UK, where the spawn of the mutant virus has emerged, hoping desperately to save themselves and their loved ones. Well, that's one version that was circulating this week anyway. The truth is rather more prosaic, and the human responses to it head-scratchingly dumb. Here's another version. Viruses mutate all the time, and you have to carefully monitor what you're seeing in case something becomes more deadly. Viruses don't tend to become more deadly because it's not in their interest to kill their hosts, although you certainly can't count on it. And there's no suggestion that it has become less deadly from any of these mutations. Apparently we were aware of this particular strain back in October, although we weren't aware whether or not it had different properties. Since then, it's risen in proportion increasingly to become the dominant strain that's out there in the environment. One potential explanation for that is that it is indeed more infectious. It's a sort of mutation that would definitely give it a competitive advantage and lead to its growth vis-a-vis its competitor strains. An alternative possible explanation that some have suggested is that it produces more asymptomatic cases, and since a higher percentage of the people it infects aren't prompted by symptoms to get a test, it has been more able to spread unnoticed compared to other variants that result in more symptoms. We don't know which of those is the case. That will only emerge with time. Now, the way to deal with it would have been to calmly note, in the course of giving a full roundup of the news of what we're seeing, that this has emerged as one of the most successful variants, but there's no evidence that it results in more harmful symptoms than any other, which is true. And that although Britain has been the first to identify the strain, it's present in a number of other countries. According to the WHO, it's been detected in Denmark, in the Netherlands, and there's been at least one case in Australia. It's also been reported in Belgium and Italy. The Nerve Tag Committee only puts the likelihood of it being more transmissible as moderate. The same feature is claimed for the new South African variant, which emerged in the last day or two. Both variants seem to have independently produced a mutation known as N501Y. This is a change in part of the spike protein that they use to enter cells. Hence the belief that this has happened because it's a comparative advantage in entering human cells. That said, the Times of London science editor Tom Whipple points out that right now there is no accepted biological explanation why they would be worse, and there are no laboratory experiments to show that they are worse. One of the confusing factors is that there are many other variants of COVID-19 that also have the N501Y mutation, and yet those variants don't appear to have increased transmission. Now, that doesn't mean the variant can't be more transmissible. It means, as is so often the case, the science isn't clear. We need to keep an eye on the evidence that develops. Now, of course, the government didn't do that at all. Instead, they held a press conference and announced there was a new mutant virus, 70% more transmissible, and as a result, they had to cancel Christmas. And all those areas that had more spread of the mutant virus had to be locked down tighter. And this was all entirely in the standard vein of how the government has been dramatising risk whenever they felt they had to justify the tightening of lockdown restrictions. Well, this time it backfired in pretty dramatic fashion. Over 40 countries, and particularly France, took the Prime Minister and his advisers at their word and cut travel ties. In the case of France, they also blocked freight transport. This was a massive overreaction by France to a massive overreaction by Britain. Some suggested it was partly motivated by France wanting to highlight consequences of a no-deal Brexit in the final stages of negotiations over fishing rights, That's possible, although given the disruption to French drivers who won't get home for Christmas, as well as French consumers who value seafood highly at Christmas and now face shortages, it's a high-cost strategy by the French if it was done purely for that reason. But maybe. It's not only British leaders who do dumb stuff, after all. The world has been pretty equal opportunities on that score in 2020. In any case, we drift towards Christmas with chaos and bad temper breaking out everywhere. Having been told that they could have a Christmas, and hearing Boris Johnson saying it would be heartless to do otherwise, many have been caught out by the massive U-turn, even though it's hardly the first time. Various people have been left distraught that they're facing Christmas alone when they've been expecting to have it with their family. A number of regions have now been told that they're being bumped up, some like my own region going straight from Tier 2 to Tier 4. Truck drivers have been tussling with police in frustration that they've been stuck on an airport runway or by the side of a motorway for 2 days, and the hours to Christmas are ticking away. On the plus side, vaccinations are now in full flow, and it's confidently expected that vaccines will be effective with all of these mutant variants. Brexiteers have been able to celebrate the fact the UK is further ahead than the rest of the world in terms of vaccinations per capita, and more to the point that Europe hadn't even got off the starting blocks, since it's been slow and bureaucratic in confirming the vaccine as safe. This has even caused some furious commentary in Germany, which, after all, is one of the leading countries in the creation of the vaccines. The first German person to get vaccinated did so in England. And while they helped to invent the vaccine, they're now standing around watching the UK push on and actually vaccinating its citizens. Brexiteers also recalled rather loudly on Twitter how Britain was lambasted for having opted out of the EU vaccine buying programme, and yet now it turns out that not only did the UK move quicker, but also bought many more doses than the EU programme, which actually turned down additional doses of the German vaccine for European internal political reasons of needing not to favour one nation too highly over others. It may come to be seen as a relatively minor victory in the context of all of the bad and bungled decisions around lockdowns. But if the UK and France are in a competition for the worst decisions, the jury is firmly out on who's going to win that one. France now has a proposal to actively discriminate against people who refuse to get vaccinated, for instance by restricting their movement. This is very much that vaccine freedom passport idea that we discussed last week. It's worth bearing in mind that France has gained the reputation of being one of the countries that has had the most restrictive measures during the first wave, and where they have the most resistance to vaccination of any other country, which may be why they're looking at sort of mandating the vaccine. They're ramping up the pressure to make more people choose to have it. Last week I reported that the UK government had said that it had no intention of doing such a thing. This week some people noticed that the government had awarded contracts to people to develop a proof of concept project for exactly that. And the Times newspaper had an editorial urging that it should happen. So, since the promises of the government seem to hold extremely low value right now, you don't have to be a rampant conspiracy theorist to think there might be a presumption of a U-turn to come. Something to look forward to in 2021. Now in a moment we'll look at a roundup of the rest of the news from the week, but first a reminder that next week we'll not have any of the usual researched videos, but there will be a few lighter and more reflective holiday videos, which I think you'll find some interesting food for thought. One of them will be my best 5 books that I've read this year. One of my New Year's resolutions for 2020 was to read 50 non-fiction books, and I'm currently finishing number 49, so I'm on target. And there have been some really fantastic, enlightening and mind-changing books mixed in with all of those, so we'll talk about that. In any case, the Friday roundup video will be back to its usual slot next week for the first show of 2021. See you then. On the day this video is being shot, news is emerging that the Brexit trade deal is just about to be delivered, or as Robert Shrimsley of the Financial Times put it, breaking. Brexit deal is done. Or not, but nearly. Press conference tonight, or tomorrow, really early, or later. Sources say it's totally in the bag, but sources caution it could still slip through our fingers at the last minute. In advance of having seen it, I'm confidently predicting the following. Nigel Farage and the uber Brexiteers will call it a betrayal. It will nevertheless turn out to be slightly better than expected. And in spite of all of the voices raising criticism, of which there will be many, it will pass easily in the House of Commons. Since I haven't seen it, I can't offer an opinion on whether it should or not. Just that regardless of your opinion, it will. There will be chaos at the borders in any case for the next couple of months, but then there's chaos right now even without Brexit. Such things will pass in due course. I will make just one observation, and it's one that I've made before. The only way this deal got done was by the government having the power and being able to convey with conviction its willingness to walk away from the table. The EU has played hardball in these negotiations for perfectly understandable reasons. The situation we had in the hung parliament of last year with idiotic politicians trying to pass motions forbidding a no-deal outcome, signalling to Brussels they could get whatever deal they wanted because the UK literally couldn't walk away. That was the worst of all worlds. As it is, we reach Christmas with Boris Johnson's government having demonstrated supreme incompetence on the coronavirus, but mitigating this to some extent by delivering its election promise to get Brexit done. Maybe a coincidence, but this week saw the first poll that showed the Conservatives creeping back ahead of Labour. Now, in the US, things have been even more wild. Trump has been lashing out in ways that have begun to baffle even his long-standing supporters, the most dramatic example of which was the COVID relief bill, which had been painfully and tortuously negotiated between Democrats and Republicans and then eventually passed with support on both sides, only to have Trump attack it because it only provides $600 per person in COVID relief, whereas he decided it should really be $2,000, which is not exactly a Republican position on that bill. Certainly the radical Democrats have jumped with joy to support that outcome in a way that really should make you wonder what the heck is going on. And it's left Republicans in Congress wondering what on earth they were supposed to do in that situation. There's every sign now that Trump, in the last days of his administration, is turning on his own party, dividing it into Trump loyalists who are prepared to line up with the narrative of resisting election fraud in spite of the paucity of success in the courts demonstrating that such a fraud has been present in sufficient degree to overturn the election result, and then the traitors who are bowed to what they will see as inevitable, which is a Biden administration. There are plenty of stories about how this is coming about because of the president's desperation pushing him beyond rationality. Although you should treat such stories with caution because people have been known to invent such details reasonably often. You can see that certain Trump loyalists have been seeking to divert the president's attention towards things that he could constructively do to spoil Biden's party before he goes. One idea relates to Biden's stated intent to rejoin the Paris Agreement on climate change and the Iran nuclear deal. Both of these were originally passed in a constitutionally questionable way, in that President Obama suggested that they weren't legally binding, therefore they didn't count as treaties that needed Senate consent. Senator Ted Cruz picked up on an idea that I've seen floating around the last couple of weeks and wrote to President Trump suggesting that he now submit the Paris Agreement and the Iran deal to the House as treaties. If he were to do that, it could potentially force Biden to seek Senate approval for his intentions. And that would be likely to be unachievable, even if the Democrats were able to pull off the feat of gaining control of the Senate in the coming two runoff elections, since treaties require a 2/3 Senate vote to pass them. What this really underlines is just how broken the American system is. It's now routinely so deeply partisan that it's hard to imagine any president could ever get any treaty through the House. If nothing else, simply because the opposing side will want to deny any sitting president that kind of success. Is it possible to run a country in the long term that can't conclude a treaty with a third party? That's a solid question. In the short term, you have to imagine that poisoning the well in this way will seem highly attractive to an administration that is leaving in extreme bad temper. Now, back in the UK, there was another high-profile UK COVID rule breaker, as Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon was photographed without a mask in an indoor public space in contravention to her own rules. Apparently, it was a slip of concentration when she was attending a wake. She apologised and said she was furious with herself. Now, generally, I treat such stories as so what stories. The rules can be a bit ridiculous in practice. The occasional slips make little difference. We should be easy going when people slip up. Personally, I would be in favour of giving people strong guidance and then letting them judge situations and use their discretion. For instance, I never thought it was a big deal that Dominic Cummings and his wife on her birthday drove to Barnard Castle and sat on a bench for 10 minutes. Nobody was endangered. It was only a story because the media wanted to make it one for their own reasons. So, am I saying that everyone should move along? Nothing to see here with Nicola Sturgeon. Well, there is one difference. Most people who contravene the rules in a mild way haven't insisted that others should be punished for mild infractions. Nicola Sturgeon, however, has been extremely hawkish in general, and specifically she insisted that in the Dominic Cummings case, he should be sacked. And she tweeted this basic principle: "I know it is tough to lose a trusted advisor at the height of a crisis, but when it's a choice of that or the integrity of vital public health advice, the latter must come first." She said that of Cummings, who sat on a park bench endangering nobody, the police investigated his actions and concluded no law was broken. Arguably, in her own breach, at least ran some possibility of creating risk, and it did breach the letter and the spirit of the law. Now look, I would still rather we just all agree to be a bit more relaxed. And no, I don't mean we allow a free-for-all, therefore allowing the virus to run rampant. Just a bit less judgmental and a bit less anal about it all. But it's certainly a fair point to contrast her words and her deeds. Politicians will always be vulnerable to charges of hypocrisy. I generally think you should get away with a lapse of concentration unless you specifically didn't accept such an excuse from other people. You should be judged by the standards against which you judge others. Now, I doubt it will make the slightest bit of difference, because right now she's relatively popular in Scotland and people find all sorts of ways to excuse the people they like while damning the people they don't. But if we're going to excuse minor infractions now, let's make sure we extend the same understanding to all those people who are just about to break the letter of the Christmas rules while trying to be broadly in its spirit. People are defending her, saying everyone can have a momentary lapse. Yes, indeed. Just remember that next time it's someone else. Time for a quick couple of comments from recent videos. On the video I did last about the government's nudge unit and how it's being used to sell compliance with COVID policies, I had this question from one of my Patreon supporters. Mallen, what do you think of the suggestion that people who refuse the vaccination should be denied ICU beds if they get ill? Sounds awful to me, but some so-called fair people believe this would be correct. It's worth noting that this is a dynamic you see in a number of contexts relating to health. Some people say that overweight people shouldn't get treatment for diabetes. They brought it on themselves. Some people say smokers shouldn't get treatment for lung cancer. And here, people saying that those who refuse vaccination or even just refuse to wear a mask shouldn't be treated for COVID. You can understand the sentiments. These people are behaving in ways that increase their risk, so if they chose to do that, then taxpayers shouldn't have to foot the bill. But the logic of that position takes you to a place you really don't want to go, where you have a health service, but you only get access to it if you live your life in exact accordance with a detailed set of rules. Because if you're going to concede the principle on one, you surely have to concede it on all of them. If you have a universal health service, as we do in the UK, I know that seems like radical leftism to some of our American viewers, but it's the norm here, then it's provided as is. I mean, sure, maybe if I make some bad choices, I'm possibly going to call on those services more. But I'm not getting away with something joyous. I mean, I'd probably rather not get ill. It's not like I'm getting free champagne. What's happening is that my bad choices have delivered up some seriously unpleasant impacts. I'm suffering for those bad choices. But because I paid my taxes and I'm a citizen of this country, at least someone's going to try and help me survive. Let's put it another way. A government that seeks to punish citizens that don't conform to its view of what an optimum lifestyle would be doesn't deserve to be in power. It would be a health dictatorship without guns. As soon as you concede that principle, that's the end point that it takes you. Second, related question from last week's show where I talked about how the government could try letting us use our judgment about COVID risk rather than infantilizing us by telling us every detail of what we can and can't do. Use your own judgment about COVID. What about externalities, i.e. the impact on third parties? And I reply to that saying appropriate rules for public places is surely not the same as rules for what you can and can't freely decide to do with your own family and friends with their agreement. And the reply to that was this: sure, because the externality is much larger in public space, but it is not zero in private. Third parties might become infected that would not have been if the virus had not been spread between the two parties that agreed to take the risk. This assumes that the deal should be that I only step outside my front door if I can do so at zero risk to other people. Now, if that were the rule, then I would never step outside my front door, because in freely living our lives, we always pose some risk to other people. Look, driving your car is one of the riskiest things that we all habitually do without a second thought. Every time I get in to drive my car, even if I'm a careful driver, I increase the risk to other road users because there's a chance I might cause an accident that injures them. But we trust people to use their good skill and judgment in how they drive, even though some will get it wrong. The question then as always becomes, where do you draw the line? The government can't cover all the shades of grey in its rules. If I was in a crowded place recently in a tier 4 area, the possible small risk I would pose to others because I might be infected is still going to be larger than if I've spent most of a week in isolation working from home. The rules can't capture all of those. There has to be some element where you can use your judgment. Sooner or later, you have to accept that society will only run if we're allowed to take some risk. And indeed, that includes risks for other people. We survive it best when we make ourselves resilient, not when we ask the system to clear all of the dangers out of our way. Lots of people are feeling bereft this holiday. Their plans have been thrown out because of COVID restrictions. Maybe you're spending Christmas alone when you'd expected to be with others. Maybe you're worried about family members who will be alone who are going to be with you. Maybe none of these things, but you go towards 2021 worrying about the state of the world and not sure if you can celebrate and be happy. I learned a lesson early in adult life that comes to mind on this. In my early 20s, I once did a 3-day fast to raise money for charity. And it was fantastic. I mean, we were hungry, it had its moments, but generally we felt extremely virtuous, rather pompously self-satisfied about it all. And I don't mean to be down on my younger self. It was a good thing to do. The following year, I was house-sitting for some good friends who were in India for 6 weeks. It included the Christmas period. And I was supposed to get some money through the post and it didn't come. And this was before the days when you could just get someone to transfer something to your account wirelessly. And within minutes it would be available. Yes, youngsters, it was a primitive world back then. If it didn't arrive, you didn't have it. My Christmas dinner that year was a bowl of plain rice flavoured by a single tablespoon of tomato chutney. It was the only thing left in the house. And that felt utterly miserable. The difference between those two experiences comes down to choice and consequently mental attitude. I chose to do the first one myself, so I had a great story to tell about it. It made me proud as well as hungry. The second one happened to me. And at that age, I hadn't developed the skills to rise above that and turn it into a positive story. So, of course, when something happens to you and it's not your fault, it's really hard not to feel miserable and hard done by. But ultimately, what you come to realise over time is this. You can't control what happens. You can only control how you respond to it. You can control whether you're cast as a victim who can only suffer the consequences, or whether you see it as an opportunity. For sure, it's not an opportunity you chose, but one nonetheless that you have the wit and the ingenuity to work out how to use it. Necessity has always been the mother of invention, for those who see adversity as a problem to be solved, not a state to be endured. Gonna be on your own this year because of what happened with COVID? Okay. Well, this might be the only time you get to experience what a solo Christmas can be like. So how could you use the opportunity to do something amazing and different? You don't have to fit with anyone else's version of tradition for once. You can set your own. So you're one chance, because next year will probably be completely different. The point is, if this were an opportunity never to be repeated, rather than a mishap dealt to you by a cruel universe, how different could you make it from the thing that you fear it to be? I'm not saying it's easy to do, but it is in your control, or it can be. And yes, I shall be spending Christmas on my own this year. On the plus side, I will be managing significantly better than rice with tomato chutney. Either way, I hope you have a great holiday season. It's just time quickly for me to thank once again all the good people who support this channel on Patreon. I launched the Patreon page halfway through this year. I could never have contemplated getting to the ambition of producing 3 videos per week without the support that you've given me. As it is, I'm hopeful that lots more good things can be done in 2021. It's all made possible by those patrons. So if you would like to support the independent, fact-focused and non-ideological content that I aim to create on this channel into the new year and beyond, please go to patreon.com/Mallen Baker. Your support is always appreciated. Either way, have a great Christmas and New Year. My name's Mallen Baker. This is the Mallen Baker Show.